Well, by my clock, it is 12 o'clock Eastern, and I want to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for you to pass along to anybody that you think might be interested. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is John Mann. I'm a postdoc fellow at the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, and I want to welcome everyone to the webinar, Farm-Based Biocontrol Seed Treatments for Improving Soybean Yields. Before we get started with the presentation, I want to point out a few items. If you haven't already done so, to the right of your screen is a poll just to give us some good information about how you heard about this webinar. Also, about halfway through the presentation, we'll have a 60-second break in which we're going to ask you a few questions, and these questions will be just for fun. Then at the conclusion of the question and answer session, we've got four quick questions that I hope you will stick around and answer. Also, in the course of the webinar, we're going to change the screen a couple of times, and I want to just demonstrate this to you real quick. So you'll see a flash, and then hopefully it'll reset back up on your system. At the top of your screen, you'll see this little person that looks like they've got their hand in the air. And at the conclusion of the question and answer session, if you'll click on that, scroll down, and you'll see this applause feature. I'd like you to help me give Dr. McSpadden Gardner a round of warm round of applause, Adobe Connect style. And finally, I'm going to click into this next screen. Maybe. There we go. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen there's a chat box, and as your questions come up, if you would please enter them in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions at the conclusion of the webinar. And again, I want to thank everybody for participating, and with that, I want to go ahead and pass this along to Dr. McSpadden Gardner, who is a professor of microbiology of plants, biocontrol, and phytobacteriology, and the OAR DC Director, Organic Foods and Farming Education and Research at Ohio State University. And he is going to tell us more about seed treatments for improving soybean yields. Take it away, Brian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mann. Today, what I would like to do with this webinar is to do three things. The first is to introduce a technology that comes out of the public sector research on microbial ecology and plant health. The second part is to talk about how that technology might be turned into a business that has a value proposition both for the growers as well as for a startup company that may consider licensing this technology. And then the third part of today's webinar will be an open discussion. So as I go through this presentation, feel free to type into the chat box questions. Dr. Mann will be taking notes of those. And then as we stop both at the end of the technology description and at my initial discussion of business model and business plan, he will then bring those questions forward in the last part for further discussion. So as I move into my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that the work that you're going to be seeing is really the output of a lot of people, including postdocs and graduate students and undergraduates, as well as cooperators here at the OARDC and at other institutions. The funding that provided for the development of this technology, like a lot of the technologies that are developed at the land-grant universities, comes from the mix of federal and state and private enterprises. And the more recent funding that's allowing me to participate in this discussion is coming from the Ohio State University's Center for Applied Plant Sciences and our Tech Commercialization Office. So, what are biocontrol seed treatments? There are a lot of plant-associated microorganisms that can be applied to seed before planting. Some are applied in the hopper, as the technology that I'll be describing today, and some are applied by seed treaters and seed producers pre-bagging. In general, these microorganisms, when they're applied to seed, can increase crop yields by 3 to 5% on average, though I'll show you data indicating the type of variation that one can expect. Specifically today, I'm going to move from these general concepts into a specific biocontrol seed treatment that increases plant yields, and I'm going to be using the data generated on soybeans in my laboratory as an example, though the application of these microorganisms can in fact increase crop yields on multiple crops. So those of you who might be farmers may already be aware that there are in the seed industry for conventional farmers chemical seed treatments. So conventional farmers often ask the question, why would I bother with a biological seed treatment? And organic farmers who have good cultural practices, which are intended to minimize the impact of soil-borne diseases, also ask, why would I bother using a biological input when I'm already using good cultural practices for disease control? The bottom line is that soil-borne diseases of plants must be controlled for an operation to be fully profitable. Certified organic growers who don't use chemicals can use biological controls and plant growth promoting bacteria to serve this purpose. And it's been shown in a number of studies that the biological agents can actually complement the activities of certain chemical fungicides to increase productivity in conventional farming as well. If you take a look at a corn plant and you start looking very closely at it, here is a single corn root blown up by a micrograph, and this is a little root hair. Each of these little dots is, in fact, a single microorganism, a little bacteria. This line over here is a hyphal strand of a fungus. And in fact, if you count all of these organisms up, there's more microorganisms on a plant than there are people on planet Earth. And just like there are people who serve different functions within societies and have different relationships with their natural environment, these microorganisms, which can be found all over healthy plants as well as sick plants, can affect the health of the system as well. So I want you to consider a general ecological model. If you go out into a grower's field a few weeks after planting, you can find a number of plants that look spotless and apparently fully healthy, but you'll also find areas where the plants are of a smaller biomass. Maybe there's some discoloration, some indication of nutrient stress is indicated by yellowing or purpling. And the reason for this is because pathogens, here indicated by red triangles, actually place stress on the plant roots and prevent them from fully functioning. Soil-borne diseases and the pathogens that cause them are actually omnipresent on farms, and they must be controlled to maintain profitability because depending on the prevailing environmental conditions, productivity can be reduced by 5 to 95% in any given field. The things that promote this are continuous monoculture, which generally leads to a buildup of soil-borne pathogens, and wet and cool soils, or anything that slows the germination of seed and root growth. Here is some data that was published just a few years ago looking at the major diseases of soybean. And those that are highlighted in this red box are actually the soil-borne diseases. So you can see that the impact of these diseases is quite significant even today on conventional farms throughout the United States. General principles about soil-borne disease control is that the sound cultural practices, good tillage, balanced nutrition, suitable rotations, and the use of disease-resistant cultivars do provide a large degree of control. However, additional chemical controls and seed treatments are available to conventional farmers. Fumigation is actually used in Florida and California quite extensively, primarily on vegetables and floriculture crops. But the agronomic crops are generally treated with chemicals, each which has a limited spectrum of activity. Overall, chemical and biological seed treatments can provide meaningful soil-borne disease protection to crops, and this has been shown in multiple studies. For those of you who are not familiar with the chemicals that are commonly used on soybean, this is a list that you'll find in Extension Bulletin. And in that same bulletin, you can see that the average yield response, this happens to be throughout Illinois, to these seed treatments was averaging about 0.3 bushels per acre. Now, the yields on these farms were typically about 40 bushels an acre, so you're looking at 1 to 2% on average. But the point that I want you to recognize here is that in some situations, you actually had a little bit of a yield drag, but in more of the situations, you had a positive yield response, and that's what gives you that positive average. So the take-home message here is that whether you're using a chemical or a biological, you can expect a spectrum of responses. But what the farmer wants to see overall is that the net average, particularly on a 3-year rolling basis, is well into the positive range. That's what determines the value proposition. Let's talk briefly about biologicals now. And where they come from are that set of beneficial microorganisms that you often find around the roots of healthy plants. They're sometimes referred to as biocontrol agents because scientists, when they were first studying these, were focused on the development of disease. And so then these agents were referred to as being able to control biologically the pathogens causing those diseases. Subsequently, those organisms have found to have multiple functions and are sometimes referred to as plant growth promoting or plant health promoting bacteria or microorganisms. This is a study that was done over a decade ago, but it illustrates quite nicely that if you look into any given agricultural soil, you're able to pull out a number of these organisms which have beneficial plant health promoting activities. And here we see a number of isolates that were tested, the fraction that were actually effective, and the average disease reduction. This was a soil-borne disease test that ranged anywhere from 30 to 70%, averaging about 50% under the assay conditions. And the point of showing you this is just simply to illustrate what I was diagramming here, that there are populations of microorganisms that can promote plant health. More recently, I would like to emphasize that biological control and plant health promotion are really emergent properties. The microorganisms are acting at a level that's smaller than a single plant cell, but in total, they can affect the overall growth and vigor of a plant. And this can arise due to multiple modes of action. Those of you who are scientists in the room recognize that there are different mechanisms that have been proposed for this, but ultimately the sum total of the plant's effect can be enhanced through inoculation. So now let me turn to briefly describing a group of microorganisms that was not discovered in my laboratory, but I've been working on for over a decade. This group is a group of bacteria known as fluorescent pseudomonads, and I'm not too concerned with the scientific details other than you'll sometimes see this term DAPG, which represents this molecule here, which are actually produced by these bacteria. Now, this molecule is known to be an antibiotic. It's toxic to many plant pathogens, but it's also been shown to be able to induce the plant host's immune system. And when it's produced by these bacteria in the root zone, in the rhizosphere, it quickly degrades. So what you're getting by applying this biological to the root zone is production of this plus a variety of other compounds that have multiple positive net effects on the growth of plants. These bacteria have been shown to be used effectively as seed treatments on different crops, and there was a very nice summary work of many years of field data that was published on wheat back in 2002. But the work that I want to talk about today is focused on soybeans. So we began our studies by looking throughout the state of Ohio at corn and soybean fields in different growing regions and to count the number of these beneficial organisms in the roots of plants and the incidence, and then characterizing the subspecies diversity. The point that you should take home from this graph is that the proportion of roots of soybeans grown at these different locations in these different years runs on average about 40% of the roots at a level that we would expect soil-borne disease suppression. What that means is that if we were to treat soybeans, the other 60% or so of roots at those locations might also get colonized by these bacteria and therefore be protected. And that is where you're getting your net yield responses. We were actually able to use the tools of molecular and microbiology to isolate these representative strains. And we were able to create a low-cost formulation that I want to describe here as the basis of the technology that could be licensed from Ohio State University. What we do is we take bacteria, we grow it up on an agar plate, which is about 4 inches in diameter. We then add that to an organically acceptable matrix that has a fixed moisture level to it. That gives us a long-term stable formulation that can be delivered to customers over a 3 to 6 month period. And then the customer is able to activate the inoculate 1 to 7 days prior to planting simply by adding water in a fixed volume to this. If you incubate it for 12 hours, the inoculum is activated and grows to a level that allows you to dilute it in a larger volume of water. In this case, a small 100-gram bottle is able to be diluted into 10 liters of water, and that's sufficient to treat seed that's necessary to plant about 100 acres of soybean or 300 acres of corn. What this actually looked like is this plastic bottle here. We used a hand pump sprayer to apply the inoculum in the hopper of the grower's seed bins, hand mix it, and then to plant it immediately afterwards. When we did trials on our research station, we did this with several different flavors of the DAPG producing bacteria called different genotypes. But what I want you to look at are the numbers here. This is the yield responses in bushels per acre compared to the untreated. You'll note that the net is always positive, as is the chemical seed treatment. And the positive yield responses were occurring in approximately 70% of the trials. And where they were occurring, they were equaling approximately 90% of the yield response that we were seeing for the chemical seed treatments on these fields. The overall yield response that we were seeing was 0.6 to 1.4 bushels per acre, which is approximately 5% of the yields we were seeing. It was also done on a number of conventional production farms with similar results, and then also on organic farms. And all of this work's been published. Here we actually enumerated the number of beneficial bacteria, and you'll see that on the treated plots, we're getting an order of magnitude higher, 10 times as many bacteria on average on the roots of the seed-treated plants, and the yield responses were positive at all of these locations. And the overall yield response over 6 site years, this is data from just 4 of them, was approximately 4 to 6%. One last point I want to make about this technology came up as we were doing these seed treatment trials. We came across a portion of land that had very poor soil conditions. And what we found is that where we had inoculated the seed, the plants were growing much better than where we had not inoculated or where we had applied a chemical fungicide. So here we're dealing with a stressful soil situation that was subsequently found to be low pH. And we did this experiment over multiple years and again saw significant increases in the height as well as the yields of the plants when the plants were grown under acidic soil conditions. The reason why we were seeing the increased growth was because on the treated seed, we were actually seeing significant increases in the amount of accumulated phosphorus and magnesium and significant reductions in the amount of aluminum and manganese. So what we were seeing was that under acidic soil conditions, you were not only getting better growth, but you were getting better growth because of better management of the nutrition. Now, no self respecting farmer is going to, in the United States, be growing on soils that are averaging pH 5. However, there are spots like this in most fields. And so, again, the seed treatment provides insurance against these abiotic stresses which occur in patches in production fields. So, to summarize the description of the technology, these DAPG producing bacteria can be used as seed treatments to effectively increase stands and yields of field crops, and this is especially true under poor growing conditions. Cost-effective in-hopper seed treatment can be used by farmers, and this may be one way that they can farm their native beneficial organisms because we actually have the tools available to go onto an individual's farm and isolate the strain that's already inhabiting that farm. The field efficacy of these seed treatments was good or better than some of the commercialized seed treatments. And for that reason, we believe that this technology has potential to be utilized by growers on a larger scale. So at this point in time, I believe that Dr. Mann has a couple of questions that can be asked of the audience.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pop these questions up real quick, and we'll spend about 45 seconds to a minute and give you a chance to answer them. So these are just for fun, but they are related to the presentation that we just heard, the first part of the presentation. And don't be afraid to guess wrong.
This is as much a measure of my effective communication skills as anything else.
Okay, we'll give it about another 15 seconds. And also, if you've already answered the question, if you are starting to think of your questions related to the first part of the webinar, you can go ahead and enter those into the chat box. And like I said, we'll get to those at the conclusion. Well, I think we've got close to the amount of participation I think we're going to get. So everybody got question number 1 right, and the answer to question number 2 is actually C. So it looks like the majority of folks got that. And let me close these, and with that, we will resume the presentation. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. So the question that I want to pose to all of you at this point is, can a rural entrepreneur develop this seed treatment technology into a viable business? Now, those of you who are business people know that you have to think through all of the aspects of a technology, not just whether or not it works, but if you can actually convince people to utilize it. You also have to think about regulatory concerns. You have to think about competitive concerns. And you have to ask yourself, do you have a model that is worthwhile? So, to help you with that, what I'm going to talk about now is the market need for biological seed treatments and for biopesticides broadly. Talk with you a little bit about the value proposition that growers and individual businesses that are producing such seed treatments might expect to see. A little bit about the competition that exists already within the marketplace. and then talk briefly about a paper that was published a couple of years ago by a colleague at Cornell University that really is a very good way of understanding how this business of biological inoculants and biopesticides has developed over the past decade. And then I'll provide some guidance for startup, some ideas that you need to consider and that could be part of the thinking process that will lead you to decide whether or not this is an opportunity that's right for you. Let's talk a little bit about that market need. Remember, I said that soil-borne diseases are omnipresent and yields can be increased with biological seed treatments. This isn't just the data that I have on my technology, but on multiple studies done both in Ohio and in other locations around the country. The organic sector won't use chemical inputs by design, and it's continuing to see double-digit growth annually. Currently, there are over 4 million certified crop acres in the United States, and it's expected to continue to increase 10 to 20% over the next 5 years. Many growers are already using different microbial products. This includes both conventional and organic growers. The reasons why they're choosing to use microbial products is that there are shorter pre-harvest and shorter re-entry intervals. Those of you who are growers know that there are label restrictions on the applications of pesticides and certain inputs, and there are safety recommendations about how long before harvest and how long after treatment it is safe to go back into those locations. Some growers use it as resistance management because overuse of fungicides can lead to resistance. We have a situation, in fact, in Michigan that developed a few years ago where the overuse of a very popular seed treatment and soil fungicide, mefenoxam and metalaxyl, occurred at such a level that many growers were forced to switch control measures because most of the soil-borne fungi in those fields had become resistant to that chemical. And of course, for soybeans and other legumes, there already are inoculants that enhance nitrogen fixation. Now, these are completely different bacteria. They are called rhizobium, and what they do is they allow the legumes to form a symbiosis and make their own nitrogen fertilizer. And this inoculation can be done on a regular basis and has also been shown to increase overall productivity if done on a regular basis. So let's talk a little bit about the value proposition of the DAPG producing seed treatments for the grower customer. As I indicated, that the seed treatments can, on conservatively, provide 2 to 5% yield increases on average. What we know is that for an individual site, 3 of 5 years typically give positive yield responses, and the responses are similar for chemical and biological treatments. This is not only true for the DAPG producers, but for all microbial and chemical seed treatments. Take the values that we got on soybeans of 0.6 to 1.4 bushels per acre and recognize that the value is $7 to $14 per bushel of soybean. The grower can expect a $4 to $20 per acre gross return for treatment. The cost of the seed treatment is estimated to be $1 to $5 per acre. And again, the $4 to $6 per acre is actually the price that is used by one of the leading seed treatment companies active today. The target for the industry is to have a return on investment for the grower of around 4 to 1. So if they expect to only give the grower a $4 yield response, then they will charge only $1 for that product. Now, for a businessman who wants to look at this technology and ask, can I make a business out of it, or can I supplement my current business? You need to recognize a couple of the values that are here. Just looking at soybeans, there's over 75 million acres of soybeans in the US. In Ohio, there's about 10 million acres of farmland, 4 and a half million of which are planted to soybeans each year. And if you recognize that the cost of production for the DAPG producers is going to be somewhere between $3 and $10 per unit, and a unit is able to treat 100 acres of soybean seed, sale price then, reasonably and conservatively at that dollar per acre, is $103 to $310 per unit if you roll the entire cost of production into the sale price, which gives you again $1 to $3 per acre that the grower would be paying. If you got a 1% market penetration, you could bring in revenues of between $45,000 and $135,000 per year in gross sales. That's using Ohio soybeans as the target market and selling a total of only 450 units. If you expanded that to either other crops or to other regions, if you look at the number of soybeans in the US and said we're going to sell to only 1% of the growers, that would mean you would have to sell 7,500 units, and you could bring in on the order of $1 million in gross sales. Now that's just a value proposition based on a back of the envelope calculation and knowing what the market size and the current use of seed treatments is for soybeans. But let's talk more about biopesticides broadly. If you look at the global biopesticide market, this is a study that was done again about a decade ago. And so the numbers in that report actually projected 150 to 300% growth over these numbers. And what I'm showing you here is that back in 2004, they were estimating that the bacterial microbials that are used as biopesticides were being sold at about $80 million total market in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That number right now is probably somewhere around 250 to $450 million in gross sales just of the bacterial microbials. And you'll see that there are other organisms as well that can be used as biopesticides. So what's driving the growth of this market? First of all, the global consumer market has shifted in the balance of what they're wanting to eat in the developed countries as well as the developing countries. Simply stated, there's a demand for high quality food, reduced pesticides exposure, and for organic production. The global producers are responding to that demand, and they are looking for methods of improving their pest management practices and resistance management, even if they are conventional, and for certified organic management options. Because what is clear is that regardless of your mode of producing, disease pressure is omnipresent. There's also a favorable commercial and regulatory environment, not only in the United States, but globally. And again, the reason for that is that agencies such as the US Environmental Protection Agency would like to be able to put restrictions on chemicals which, while effective and useful for growers, pose health and environmental concerns which seem disproportionate. So, for example, the large majority of fungicides sprayed and used in this country are known to be carcinogenic, and there is a desire to substitute other technologies, biologically based technologies, to substitute for those products. Let me turn now briefly to the competition. There are both small and large companies that have been and are currently working in the space of biological seed treatments. The small companies run anywhere from less than $1 million a year to $100 million a year in revenue. Most of these are privately held. A few of them are more than 10 years old, but really there's been a surge of growth in the last 5 years, both in the United States and globally. Again, mostly of the much smaller size. You will see as petroleum prices are increasing, more activity from the likes of the transnational chemical companies, those companies that are producing the large majority of chemical fungicides. And those companies go in and out of this marketplace because they're used to working at a market scale and distribution channels that are quite different. These smaller companies tend to be more regionally based and therefore provide a service to their customers and a knowledge of their customers' issues that perhaps the larger companies are not as able to provide. Some of these include Biocrop Science. Votivo is a bacillus seed treatment for soybeans that is used and intended for use in combination with Poncho, which is a seed treatment chemical for insect control. Becker Underwood is a mid-sized company. It's a public company, but they have been in this space for a while. They've produced Subtilex, again, another bacillus seed treatment that can be combined either with other chemicals or with their rhizobia. And then you have smaller established companies such as Bioworks that has other microbials. These are based on fungi that have a beneficial effect. And then there are other companies that are distributors of a relatively small handful of active ingredients, but that are packaged and marketed in various ways to, again, smaller, more local, regional markets where the knowledge of the needs of those growers are met by service companies that know their needs better. So where would an entrepreneur start to figure out whether or not they should get into this business? There was a paper that was published a few years ago. You can actually get this online. If you just type in the author and the journal, you'll be able to get it for free. And what he pointed out in this article was that there's many different ways to approach the development of biopesticides. And these have been models that have been laid out again in multiple countries for the past 40 or 50 years, but they all have different costs associated with them, and the time to market takes a different amount of time. For this seed treatment that we're highlighting here, I think the model of local production and marketing as a plant strengthening agent or biofertilizer without making the specific pesticide uh, claims is probably the most effective model to be pursuing. And for those of you who think that this is difficult to get done, it's being done. This is a company that's working out of Costa Rica. I've seen similar production facilities that, again, are fairly crude by university laboratory or transnational laboratory standards, but they are sufficient for scale production and distribution of materials. Some large growers are doing this themselves, and others are relying on affiliated small companies. Not only in the NAFTA region, but throughout Latin America, this has become popular as well as East Asia. So lastly, I'd like to turn to some things that I think that any of you who are interested in developing this technology really need to think about if you're going to start a business based on this technology or any other technology for microbial seed treatments. First, you really need to understand the technology you wish to market. For the sales to be effective, the grower has to be convinced that you know what you're talking about and that the value proposition is firmly grounded in science. You need to know the strengths and the limitations. One of the misconceptions about chemical seed treatments is that they're effective all the time. And as I showed you in that University of Illinois bulletin, the yield responses are not guaranteed for every site in every year. What is guaranteed is that over a multi-year rolling average, the plant responses are always in the positive zone, and that's where the value proposition comes in. That's true for the chemicals, and it's also true for the biologicals. You need to understand what can and cannot be done with biologicals. You also need to understand that one of the limitations is you can't cook the inoculant. Um, some farmers like to get their seed pre-treated. They put the bag in the barn, and if they happen to be having to do a late planting, that barn may heat up to temperatures that are clearly uncomfortable for human beings, but are actually deadly for the seed treatment. So there are some technical limitations that you need to become familiar with. Second point is that you need to really define and connect with your target market. You need to just determine who your customers are, what the size of their operations are, what their current needs and expectations for seed treatments are. Some growers are comfortable with the idea of using the model that I showed you where they apply in hopper with a sprayer that's pre-calibrated. I have had other growers say that they will never adopt that because they want to put their seed into the hopper and go, and therefore they would be amenable only to a service that gives them the seed treatment again within that window of efficacy prior to putting the seed into their planters. Once you understand your target market and your potential customers, you need to establish reasonable sales goals and determine your branding strategy. And here I would say that there is a fuzzy line that exists right now in the marketing of microbial seed treatments. There are products that have the same active ingredient that are being sold as a biopesticide. To do that, that means that the company has paid for the US EPA to review the health and safety of that uh, product, which is a prerequisite for claiming disease control. Other companies are using the same active ingredient but not making specific claims, but are only highlighting the fact that application of the microorganism consistent with that ecological model that I showed you simply provides for a healthier environment and higher yields. Cost of marketing this way is obviously cheaper than the startup costs for marketing this way. Once you've determined how you're going to go about things and you feel that you've got a market that you can sell to, you need to figure out how you're going to manage production and quality control issues. And this can be done both in-house, as I mentioned, I've seen on-farm operations, or through a subcontract. I have seen, again, multiple business models in different countries where some people have a contract fermenter produce all the inoculant that's needed for a year, and then they simply package it and sell it. Others who produce the material themselves and distribute it. In either case, you want to make sure that the quality of the inoculant is maintained, and you do need to set up some sort of quality control management. Otherwise, you take the risk of what I saw happen in South Korea, where an individual decided that they would be using and growing a microbial that was commercially distributed through another company on his own. And when he did that, he ended up not being very sanitary about his production and ended up introducing 1 year a large volume of pathogen along with his biocontrol agent. And in the end, he lost about 30% of his yield due to the disease that he himself had introduced by poor quality control of the on farm production. Lastly, you need to understand your state's regulations related not only to selling and utilizing pesticides, but also for fertilizers. Uh, you can be considering a model where you were actually selling product, or perhaps you might want to consider developing this technology into a service. One individual once asked the question, if I get a portable seed treater and put it in the back of my truck, would I be able to carry this around to multiple farms and treat the seed before they put in the planter? And I said, yes, Just recognize that there are costs associated with that service that are different than selling the product individually. And lastly, whether you're interested in this technology or another microbial seed treatment, you need to find and license that appropriate technology. I recommend that you research the research. If you use Google Scholar, you'll probably find more papers than you can imagine on products that are like this that exist in academia but have not been fully field tested as the one that I've shown today. But once you've decided which technology you want to approach, you need to look at both the university inventors as well as their tech licensing offices. And what I really recommend is that you talk first with the inventors so that you understand how much research and development has already gone on and whether or not that there is additional research that's required to make it a useful and viable product based on the business model that you choose. And once you have an idea of that this is the technology that you want to be using, then you need to approach the tech licensing offices. And here you can do this through tco@osu.edu. And you can discuss not only this seed treatment, but other technologies that our laboratory and other laboratories in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences have developed for the improvement of farm productivity. And lastly, I would just like to leave you with this screenshot, which I took just this past year when I was collecting information about starting biotech companies. And the advertisement I thought very timely was there of Bayer seed treatment on looking at supporting the development of new biotech. So with that, I'll finish and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, I think we're going to introduce a couple of real quick questions again for the audience. I'm going to pop these out real quick, and again, they're just for fun, something to think about, and also to kind of get you thinking about your questions related to the webinar. So as you're looking at these and answering, again, let's be thinking about your questions, and go ahead and type those into the chat box. And it looks like we've already got a couple. Before we get to those questions, I've got one I want to ask, and I've gotten a couple of emails since we started the webinar from actually in India, and I think the question that this particular business person has got is overseas. Who do you think would be a good candidate for trying to take on this technology? So let's say you're dealing with somebody from India. Who would be a good candidate for using this, and what advice might you give to them when you're dealing with something from an international perspective?
So first, let me say that the microbial inoculant industry as a cottage industry has existed for about 30 years in India, and there's already a lot of regional production that's going on. The difficulty, and it gets to one of the other questions that I see from Blue Pike Farm about producing how much education do you need to be able to produce something like this well? Actually, someone who has a basic college degree, actually even someone who has a high school degree but is well organized, can actually manage the production and quality control. And it's been done that way in India and in Indonesia currently.
Very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close these trivia questions out real quick, and I'm going to answer them for you first. The first one is D, all of the above, and the answer to the second is A. At least we hope it to be that. And with that, let me close these out, and I'm going to get to a couple of these questions that we've got in the chat box. And the first is from Blue Pike Farm. And the question is, how many PhDs do I need in my lab to produce this product? What other startup costs are involved? And can I do this in my garage, barn, or do I need a sophisticated lab?
The equipment that you need to maintain the purity of the strain can actually be purchased for under $5,000. The training that's required is definitely not PhD level, but I would recommend that if you were interested in pursuing this, that we talk about providing the necessary training to you so that you feel confident that you can do it yourself. Um, can you do it in your garage? Yes, but going back to the quality control part, there are issues with cross contamination that you have to be aware of. And again, the solutions to those are all fairly low cost.
Okay. The next question is from Mike, and he asks, "Can I do this planting, or can I do this by planting grass, legumes, and grazing on it with cattle for 3 years, and then converting back to annual production?" So it sounds maybe like a crop rotation question.
Right. So, what Mike I think is getting at is, can I reduce my soil-borne disease pressure by going to a long rotation? And one of the reasons why I showed the yield responses on the organic farms was to highlight the fact that even if you were using the best rotations, the fact that these organisms are the pathogens that cause soil-borne disease and provide a yield drag are present in all soils means that you're only bringing down that potential so much. The particular organic farms that we were working with were using 4 year standard rotation. And yet, on some of the fields, we consistently saw a much higher than average yield response because those fields happened to be wetter longer and shaded by a tree line. And so the answer to your question is, if you've got really good land and you're doing really good rotations, you're probably on that low end of that 3 to 5% yield response to a seed treatment for annual production. But if you've got areas of land that have added water stress, added temperature stress, one of the reasons why conventional seed is all chemically treated right now is that growers have recognized that the heat units that come from planting earlier often are offset in terms of yield if they can just get good seedling disease protection. Uh, Many organic growers delay planting, but while they may have less seedling disease, they're also giving up some of the yield potential by planting a variety that has a longer maturity period. So it is complex. There are trade offs here. But if you look at standard conventional 4 year rotations or uh, standard organic 4 year rotations or standard conventional 2 year rotations or monoculture, seed treatments have a lot of value.
Our next question is from a person self-identified as guest, and the question is: Can a producer randomly collect a soil sample from most productive farm soil, suspend microbial in buffered water, and then inoculate the seeds in a planter box? So it sounds like maybe try to make this themselves.
Do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I'll just bring this slide back up to tell you why that would be a dangerous thing. Um, if you were taking just from this area, you see there's still the red triangles there. There's still the pathogens there. And uh, one group of pathogens are called oomycetes, and they love water. So actually, if you were to take soil and add it and dilute it just in water to make your seed treatment, odds are you would actually promote the growth of the oomycetes at the expense of these other things, and your net would be neutral to negative in most situations. So I would not recommend doing that.
I've got another question, and I hope you'll revisit a point. I think you were making just a little bit earlier, but um, if I'm a producer and I want to use this specific product that you've talked about, I mean, there was a lot of technology presented and a lot of good information. But what would be the next thing I need to do? What's the next step for me to do? I want to do this, and where do I go from? Where do I go from here?
Well, I think the next step would be to contact me or to contact the inventor of the technology you want to develop and discuss what you think you want to do with it. And that would then allow a conversation to take place that would lead to the licensing and the developmental use of that technology in your business.
Okay, and I see you put the slide back up with your email address. Okay, another question from Blue Pike Farm. Do the seed treatments also have measurable positive effect on the nutritional quality of the corn and soybean, or is it only on yields?
This is an area that there's a lot of interest in, particularly from the organic community, but there's not a lot of data on. What we do know is that in those areas where the soil has an imbalance of fertility, uh, it seems at least that this seed treatment, the DAPG producers, can affect that nutritional balance. But in terms of the nutrition of the plant product for human or animal consumption, unless there is a strong imbalance in the soil, I doubt that it would make a measurable impact on the nutritional balance for the consumer of that plant material. And that's because the chemistry of the plant is largely determined by its genetics.
So I guess the healthiest plant is going to have a maximum nutritional value regardless of the treatment.
Right.
Okay, okay, that makes sense to me. Well, I don't see anybody else with questions in the chat box. Is Brian? Is there anything else you want to add to maybe last minute thoughts based on a couple of the questions that we had?
I think the one thing that I'd like to leave people with is a recognition that not only with the microbial seed treatments, but with a variety of technologies that are being investigated at our land grant universities, contacting the tech licensing offices of those organizations may also provide a good starting point to see what type of technologies and businesses you might develop. This is only one opportunity. I know that there are a number of technologies that are produced by our college and that can be licensed. And if you go to the TCO website, which is indicated here, you would be able to see what some of those technologies are, and then again, contact the inventor to discuss how that technology might be envisioned as part of a business, and then go from there.
Very good. Well, with that, I'm going to switch screens. We had one other question pop up from Dan, and the answer is yes. I will. I'll be happy to send out email links with this webinar. And on this last page, we've got a couple of questions that I hope you'll be willing to ask. But before we get started on that, if you remember at the very beginning, the little person with their hand up, let's please give Dr. McSpadden Gardner a warm round of applause, the Adobe Connect style, so we can make that work. It didn't stay on very long. Okay, so a few quick notes. So we've got these questions that are popped up, and also towards the bottom of the screen, there are where it says web links. There's my email address is down there, and Dr. McSpadden Gardner's email address is also down there. And we've got our next webinar that's popped up. And again, I want to thank you for participating, and especially thank you, Dr. McSpadden Gardner, for doing the webinar. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.